Every town has a name people mock. His was Ethan Cole, the boy who couldn't finish school, the man who fixed engines no one cared about, until the world realized he was fixing something far greater. Us. They called him a failure. The word stuck to him like a label he couldn't peel off, like oil on his hands that just wouldn't wash away. Teachers, neighbors, even family members had used it so casually that he started to believe it. He wasn't the kind of student that stood out. No trophies, no applause, no framed certificates on the wall, just quiet hands that loved taking things apart, radios, clocks, even the family toaster, and then figuring out how to make them work again. He didn't think of it as talent. It was just peace. The kind that came from understanding how something broken could live again if you just gave it time. When school ended, there wasn't a graduation speech, no proud photos, no applause. He took the job everyone expected him to take, changing oil at a small mechanics shop off Highway 27. The kind of place where you smelled of grease before the sun even came up. And yet, he loved it. He loved the rhythm, the click of a ratchet, the hum of a newly tuned engine, the quiet satisfaction when something finally ran right. He worked in silence, his thoughts steady and simple. Do it right, even if no one notices. At night, when the shop lights went dark, he stayed behind in his yard. There was this old, rusted 1967 Mustang that everyone said was beyond saving, but he didn't see a pile of metal. He saw a challenge. He rebuilt it piece by piece, learning the language of engines one sound at a time. Weeks passed. Then one morning, the Mustang coughed, rattled, and suddenly roared. He just stood there, hands on the hood, the sunrise spilling across his face. No one was there to see it, but it didn't matter, because for the first time, he realized something powerful. Failure had given him freedom. Freedom to build, to learn, to define success on his own terms. One night, when the rain was falling sideways, a luxury car pulled up outside his garage. The driver was a man in a tailored suit, clearly out of place among oil drums and toolboxes. The car was barely running. "You the mechanic?" he asked. "Guess so," Ethan said, wiping his hands on an old rag. 15 minutes later, the car was fixed. The man watched, curious. "How did you know what was wrong?" Ethan shrugged. "I listened." The man smiled and handed him a business card. "Victor Lang. Horizon Dynamics. You ever need a different kind of challenge, call me." Ethan looked at the card, then at his hands. He didn't call. Not yet. He wasn't chasing business cards or promises. He was chasing that same sound of something broken coming back to life. Weeks turned to months. Word spread through town not because of ads or marketing, but because people trusted him. He didn't overcharge, didn't cut corners, and if someone couldn't pay, he'd still fix their car. "You'll get me next time," he'd say. And most people did. Then one afternoon, a letter came. It was about a national innovation contest, something to do with sustainable engines. It wasn't his world, but he couldn't stop thinking about it. He stayed up for nights, sketching designs, scavenging old parts, trying to turn a dream into metal and motion. When he finally sent in his prototype, he didn't expect anything. But when the results came, he saw his name not in first place, not even in the top 5, but on the honorable mentions list. It wasn't much, but beside it was a note from one of the judges. "You see potential where others see waste. Keep building." He read that line over and over. Months passed. Nothing happened. The bills piled up again. Then another letter arrived, this time handwritten, from a teacher named Mrs. Grant, who ran an auto club at a small public school. Their workshop was falling apart, and they didn't have the funds or the morale to keep going. "If you're ever nearby," she wrote, "come talk to them." He went. The place was freezing, the tools were dull, and the kids were quiet. He didn't give them a lecture. He just rolled up his sleeves and asked, "Who wants to see how to listen to an engine?" By the end of that day, the kids were laughing, passing tools, shouting guesses. One of them, a quiet girl named Mia, stayed after class. "They say this isn't for people like me," she said softly. Ethan looked at her and smiled. "Don't spend your life proving them wrong. Spend it proving yourself right." He kept visiting. The students began to win small competitions. They started fixing up old cars for free, giving them to families who needed them. Something inside Ethan shifted. For the first time, he felt like he wasn't just fixing machines, he was fixing how people saw themselves. Then one evening, as he was locking up, a familiar black sedan pulled into the parking lot. Victor Lang stepped out, still sharp in his suit but smiling differently this time. "Still listening to engines?" Victor asked. "Always." Victor handed him a folder. Inside was a proposal. A consulting role at Horizon Dynamics. "We're building something new," Victor said. "A prototype hybrid engine. We could use your kind of thinking." Ethan hesitated. Corporate life wasn't his world. But something about the challenge caught him. So he said yes, just for a while. The first day at Horizon was like stepping into another planet. Glass walls, polished floors, people speaking in acronyms and metrics. He didn't fit in, but when he saw the half-assembled prototype, sleek, modern and silent, he knew where to start. He grabbed a wrench, listened, and adjusted a few things the team hadn't noticed. The engine purred, then steadied. The room went silent. "How did you do that?" someone whispered. "I listened," he said again. That moment changed everything. Soon, he was quietly shaping the company's biggest breakthroughs. He didn't care about titles or bonuses. He just wanted the work to mean something. But the more successful the project became, the more politics crept in. One of his colleagues, Ryan Mercer, started taking credit for ideas that weren't his. Ethan didn't argue. He just kept building. But one morning, Victor called him into his office. Someone had leaked confidential designs. His designs. The company's board suspended him pending investigation. He sat in his apartment that night, surrounded by silence thicker than any engine noise. He thought about calling it quits, but then he remembered the kids in that cold garage. The way their faces lit up when they made something work, so he fought. He traced the timestamps, found inconsistencies in the system logs, followed digital footprints like he used to trace oil leaks. Eventually, he found the truth: Ryan Mercer had stolen the blueprints. When Ethan walked into Horizon's launch event that day, everyone turned to stare. Cameras, investors, the whole corporate world watching as Ryan took the stage. And then Ethan spoke. Calm, clear, steady. "Before you celebrate this invention," he said, "you should know who actually built it." He laid out the evidence: metadata, time logs, annotated drawings. Proof so simple, even silence couldn't deny it. Victor stood, walked to the podium, and said only this: "Mr. Cole built this. And we stand by the man who listens before he speaks." When the truth came out, everything shifted. The cameras kept rolling, flashes cutting across the room like lightning. Ryan Mercer was escorted off the stage without a word. The investors, the board members, everyone watched Ethan, the man they had quietly dismissed, now standing in the center of the storm, with nothing but his honesty to protect him. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He just stood there with the same quiet steadiness that had carried him through every failure. Victor Lang walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Let's start again," he said softly. That's how Ethan ended up back at Horizon. Not as an outcast, but as someone they finally listened to. The company offered him a new position, something high, something with glass walls and a corner view, but Ethan asked for something different. He wanted a workshop. A space where he could teach, experiment, and build alongside others who had been told they weren't good enough. He wanted noise, not silence. A place where mistakes were welcome. They gave it to him. It was messy, loud, and full of half-finished machines. The first week, he filled the whiteboards with sketches and questions instead of rules. "Don't build what's expected," he told them. "Build what's missing. If you have not done Shamus, and it the 7-beated Shamus, and the Rhetoric." He invited students from the old school workshop. Mia came first. She was nervous, clutching a stack of sketches she'd drawn on scrap paper. Ethan smiled. "You kept building," he said. "Like you told me," she answered. It wasn't long before word spread. The Horizon Innovation Lab. They called it a place where broken ideas became prototypes, and failed projects were taken apart just to see what they could teach. People who had once been ignored found a reason to believe again, but not everyone at Horizon liked it. Some saw it as a waste of company resources. "You're not chasing profit," one executive said during a board meeting. Ethan leaned back in his chair. "Maybe not," he replied, "but I'm chasing purpose, and that's harder to lose." Still, the pressure grew. Numbers didn't lie, and the board wanted results they could show investors. One day, Victor came to Ethan with a heavy look. "They want to cut funding for the lab," he said. "They think it's a distraction." Ethan nodded slowly. "Then let me show them what distraction looks like when it changes lives." He invited the board to visit the lab on a Friday morning. The room was chaos: wires, tools, engines half built, but the energy was alive. Students and interns stood beside their projects. A small solar engine built from recycled parts, a prototype wheelchair that ran on low-cost batteries, a system to reuse factory heat for energy. When the presentations ended, Ethan spoke simply. "You asked for profit. I see potential. These kids are going to change industries you haven't even imagined yet. You can either fund that or get left behind by it." The room fell silent. By Monday, the lab's funding wasn't just restored, it was doubled. For the next few years, the lab flourished. Projects turned into startups, patents were filed, and hundreds of young inventors came through the doors. Yet Ethan stayed the same. He still wore old boots, still fixed things with his hands, still took time to sit with anyone who needed advice. But beneath it all, he felt something missing. One night, after everyone left, he sat at his bench, surrounded by blueprints and silence. He opened an old toolbox and found a folded letter inside one he hadn't seen in years. It was from his mother. The paper had yellowed, but the words still carried warmth. Your hands were meant to build, Ethan. Not just machines but people. When things break, remember, fixing them is what makes you whole. He sat there for a long time, the hum of the city outside fading away. The next morning, he made a decision. He left Horizon, not because he was angry, but because he needed to go back to where it all began, the small garages, the forgotten schools, the people who still thought failure was the end of the road. He started something new. He called it, the Road Workshop. No fees, no fancy buildings, just a van full of tools and a promise. Keep building. Keep believing. He drove from town to town, setting up pop-up workshops in schoolyards, barns, and empty lots. Kids showed up. Curious, skeptical, sometimes shy. He taught them what he knew. How to listen to an engine, how to fix a bike, how to believe in their own hands. Videos of the workshops started spreading online. People saw this quiet mechanic teaching kids how to rebuild their world from scraps, and they called it beautiful. Donations came in, volunteers followed. Within a year, the Road Workshop had dozens of chapters across the country. When journalists asked him why he did it, he said, "Because I was that kid once. The one who was told he'd never make it. I want to be the voice that says otherwise." He turned down interviews, partnerships, even offers to commercialize the brand. "You can't sell what's meant to be shared," he said. Then one day, Horizon called again. The board wanted to shut down the lab permanently. Low profit margin, they said. Victor asked Ethan to come to one final meeting. When he walked into that glass room, the suits looked at him like a relic. He waited until they finished their charts and numbers, then spoke softly. "You call it loss," he said. "I call it investment. Every great thing you built started as a mistake someone was brave enough to make. Don't kill the only part of this company that still remembers how to dream." He stood, nodded to Victor, and left without waiting for applause. 2 weeks later, the board reversed its decision. The lab was safe. Ethan went back to his van, his workbench, his people. He didn't know it then, but that single act, the defense of something selfless, would ripple across the world. Soon, educators from different countries reached out. A woman named Dr. Naomi Reyes from Manila wrote, "Your workshops could help thousands of kids here. Let's make it global." Ethan read the email twice, smiled, and packed his tools again. The Road Workshop went international. From the crowded streets of Manila to small villages in Kenya, children started learning the same lessons Ethan once taught in a freezing garage. Listen, build, believe. And through it all, he stayed humble. When people called him a hero, he laughed and said, "Heroes don't fix carburetors. They just keep showing up." But deep down, he knew something important had happened. He had built a legacy not from wealth or fame, but from persistence, and the belief that every broken thing deserved another chance. Ethan didn't build his legacy in boardrooms or on magazine covers. He built it on the ground with grease-stained hands, chipped tools, and classrooms full of hope. As the Road Workshop grew, it began to take a life of its own. Schools that had been falling apart found a heartbeat again. Communities that had once felt forgotten were rebuilding. Not just machines, but confidence. Kids who had never touched a wrench were suddenly dreaming about engineering, design, and invention. One local reporter followed Ethan for a week and wrote an article titled, "The Man Who Fixes More Than Engines." It went viral. Donations poured in. Sponsors wanted to attach their names to the movement. But Ethan turned most of them down. "We're not selling something," he said. "We're reminding people they already have what they need." That humility became part of the brand, if you could even call it a brand. The workshop stayed small, local, and personal. No corporate banners, no slogans. Just the same hand-painted sign everywhere he went. Keep building. Keep believing. E.C. Those 6 words started appearing in unexpected places, spray-painted on school walls, printed on t-shirts, carved into wood panels at community centers. People began to share stories online of how Ethan's program had changed their lives. A teenager in Manila built a bike generator to power her village's lights. A group of students in Brazil created low-cost prosthetic limbs from recycled materials. In Kenya, a young boy designed a water filter using discarded car parts. And in every photo, somewhere in the background, those 6 words appeared again. Ethan watched the growth from afar. Proud but cautious. He knew how easy it was for good things to be twisted by money or fame. So he kept things grounded. He still traveled in the same van, slept in modest motels, and ate at roadside diners. Whenever people asked why he didn't upgrade, he smiled and said, If I start living above the people I'm helping, I stop understanding them. But life, as it always does, shifted again. One evening, Victor Lang called. His voice carried both pride and worry. "Ethan," he said, "your workshops have outgrown you. There are hundreds of volunteers, different chapters, even copycats. Some good, some not so good. You need structure." Ethan sighed. "Structure kills things like this, Victor. Not if you build it right," Victor replied. "Come back. Let's make sure what you started doesn't fade." So Ethan returned to Horizon one last time, not to work for them, but to work with them. Together, they created the Cole Foundation. Its mission was simple: to support innovation, education, and hands-on learning for those who needed it most. Ethan made one condition clear: no ownership, no stock, no personal credit. "This foundation belongs to everyone who ever thought they were a failure," he said. It became a global network. Local workshops received microgrants. Teachers were trained. Small communities were connected through shared projects. And through it all, Ethan stayed in the background, quietly watching others lead. Mia, the quiet girl from that first school garage, had become one of the foundation's lead engineers. She was now traveling the world, training young innovators and mentoring the next generation. She often joked that Ethan was terrible at emails, but brilliant at everything else. One day, while visiting the original garage where everything started, Ethan found a dusty folder of old sketches, his first designs, scribbles, failed ideas. He laughed, remembering how naive he'd been. But then something caught his eye. At the bottom of one page was a phrase he'd written years earlier and forgotten. "What if failure is the blueprint?" He sat there for hours, thinking about it. All those moments people called failure: dropping out, losing jobs, getting suspended. They weren't endings. They were scaffolding. Each one taught him what to build next. He decided to share that message with the world. At a global education summit, he gave his first real public speech. No teleprompter, no script, just his story. "People think success is about winning," he began. "But real success comes from listening to what's broken, and choosing to fix it instead of throwing it away. That's what failure teaches us. It doesn't end the story, it starts the next chapter." The crowd stood. Not out of politeness, but because they felt it. The following months were a blur of travel and collaboration. New partnerships blossomed. Universities adopted the Cole method, a curriculum built on hands-on learning, resilience, and ethical innovation. It wasn't flashy, but it worked. Students who once struggled were suddenly thriving. Then, one afternoon, Ethan was at a small cafe in Lisbon when a young journalist approached him. "Mr. Cole," she said, "do you realize you've changed the definition of success for an entire generation?" Ethan smiled, sipping his coffee. "I didn't redefine anything," he said. "I just stopped letting failure define me." She looked at him curiously. "What keeps you going?" He thought for a long moment. "Hope," he said. "And habit. Once you've fixed enough broken things, you start believing that maybe people can be fixed too." That quote would later headline dozens of articles, but Ethan never saw them. He was too busy working on his next project. He called it Project Reclaim, a simple idea to build low-cost kinetic generators for rural homes using recycled metals. He started in a small lab with Mia and a few volunteers. It took years of trial, error, and late nights. There were setbacks, dozens of them, but every time something failed, Ethan smiled and said, "Good. Now we know what doesn't work." Eventually, they got it right. The Cole engine, as it came to be called, became a symbol of sustainable innovation, affordable, accessible, and designed to be built locally anywhere in the world. And true to his promise, Ethan released the blueprints online, for free. No patents, no ownership. Just an open invitation. Build it better. The decision shocked investors but inspired millions. Within months, small workshops across Asia, Africa, and South America were building their own versions of the Cole engine. Whole villages lit their homes for the first time, powered not by profit, but by purpose. When someone asked if he regretted not monetizing it, Ethan laughed. "You can't sell light that belongs to everyone," he said. Years passed. The foundation grew stronger, expanding into over 100 countries, but Ethan slowed down. The travel, the work, it was all catching up to him. He started spending more time in his hometown, walking the same roads where people once called him a failure. He still fixed things: neighbors' coffee makers, kids' bikes, the old Mustang he rebuilt decades ago. When a child stopped by his workshop asking for help with a broken toy, he smiled and handed over the screwdriver. "You try," he said. That's how he wanted the story to end, not with applause, but with a child learning to believe that broken things can be mended. As the years passed, Ethan Cole's story became something people whispered with awe. Not because of fame or money, but because of how quietly he'd changed the world. He had no mansion, no expensive car, no publicist. Just a small workshop that smelled of coffee, sawdust, and old metal. The global press kept chasing him for interviews, but he turned down almost all of them. He didn't want to become a symbol. He wanted to stay a builder. Symbols don't fix engines, he would say. They just remind others who did. Still, people didn't stop coming. Engineers, teachers, young dreamers, they all wanted to meet the man who taught the world to see failure differently. They called him the Mechanic of Hope. One winter morning, a delivery truck pulled up outside his small workshop. The driver handed Ethan a crate marked, "From Nairobi." Inside was a sculpture, a pair of metal hands holding a single gear. On the base was an inscription. "One hand to build. One hand to guide." It was from one of the first international workshops. Ethan traced the edges with his fingers, his eyes soft. "They're still building," he murmured. That same week, he got a call from Dr. Naomi Reyes. "Ethan," she said, her voice full of excitement. "We're expanding. Schools in Manila, Rio, Nairobi, they all want to adopt your teaching model permanently. But we need you to guide the vision. Just one more time." Ethan chuckled. "Naomi, the vision's already alive. I just lit the spark. But people still need the firekeeper," she insisted. He thought about it, then agreed not to lead, but to help structure the foundation's future. Together, they outlined a plan that would let local communities own their workshops completely. Each would be self-funded, community-led, and interconnected through mentorship programs. "We'll measure success not by patents or profits," Ethan said, "but by how many hands stay busy learning." Over the next few years, the Cole Foundation grew quietly into one of the most respected educational movements on the planet. No commercials, no celebrities, just people helping people build a better world. In 2041, the United Nations invited Ethan to speak at their Global Humanitarian Summit. It was the first time he'd traveled in years. He almost said no, but Victor Lang convinced him otherwise. "Sometimes," Victor said, "the world needs to hear the story straight from the source." Ethan walked onto that stage in a simple gray jacket, a few grease stains still visible on the cuffs. The audience was packed, scientists, leaders, journalists, all waiting for the man who'd taught millions how to fail better. He didn't bring slides or charts. He just spoke. "When I was young, they called me a failure," he began. "And they were right, at least by their definition. I didn't win awards. I didn't fit their mold. But I learned something in all those quiet hours fixing broken things. I learned that failure isn't the opposite of success, it's the teacher that gets you there." He paused, scanning the faces in the crowd. "If a car doesn't start, you don't throw it away. You listen. You find what's wrong. You fix it. Why don't we treat people the same way?" There was silence at first, then applause that grew into a standing ovation. Not the loud, fleeting kind, but the kind that comes from recognition. From understanding. After that day, requests flooded in from universities, organizations, even governments. Everyone wanted a Cole lab, a Cole curriculum, a Cole model. Ethan politely declined most of them. "You don't need my name," he said. "You just need the idea." He preferred small things like writing letters to kids who'd sent him drawings, or calling old students to ask how their projects were going. He never saw himself as a leader. He was still the same mechanic, fixing, teaching, listening. But time, even for the strongest spirits, moves quietly and fast. His hair turned silver, his steps slowed, and he started spending more mornings in the garden behind his workshop, pruning plants with the same care he once gave to engines. One summer afternoon, Victor visited him. They sat on the porch, drinking coffee in comfortable silence. "You know," Victor said, smiling, "you could have been one of the richest men alive. You turned down every offer, every deal." Ethan looked at him and smiled back. "I never wanted to be rich, Victor. I just wanted to leave something worth continuing." Victor nodded. "You did." A few weeks later, Ethan wrote what would become his final letter, a message to the next generation of builders. He titled it, "To the Builders Yet to Come." In it, he wrote, "The world will tell you to play it safe, to measure worth by numbers, to build what's profitable instead of what's right. Don't listen. Stay strange, stay persistent. Start anyway. Even when you're scared. Keep building. Keep believing." He left the letter on his workbench, next to the old wrench he'd used on the Mustang so many years ago. That night, the lights in his workshop glowed long after midnight. He was seen sitting by the window, notebook open, a faint smile on his face. By morning, the world had lost a quiet giant. The news spread slowly at first, then everywhere. Social media filled with photos of workshops around the world turning on their lights for 1 hour in his honor. No speeches, no moments of silence, just the sound of hammers, drills, and laughter echoing through garages and classrooms. Because that's what he would have wanted: movement instead of mourning. The Cole Foundation announced a new initiative in his name. The Cole Initiative. A global program dedicated to building community innovation hubs focused on sustainability, education, and repair culture. Mia, now leading the foundation, stood at the launch event and read Ethan's final letter aloud. He didn't want statues or awards, she said. He wanted hands that build. So, let's build. The world listened. In the weeks following Ethan Cole's passing, something extraordinary began to unfold. Around the world, small workshops flickered to life: garages, classrooms, even open-air sheds in remote villages, all echoing the same rhythm. Hammers striking, tools clattering, laughter mixing with the hum of creation. They called it the 1 minute of motion. Every year, on the anniversary of his passing, the entire network of road workshops would pause for 60 seconds, then resume building in unison. No speeches, no mourning, just the sound of work, the language Ethan had always trusted more than words. Mia stood in the original workshop that morning. The light filtering through dusty windows painted gold on the worn concrete floor. She placed Ethan's old wrench on the table, its metal rusted but strong. Around her, hundreds of others tuned in via video from every corner of the world. Manila, Nairobi, Sao Paulo, Mumbai, small towns that few maps even named. She spoke softly. He used to say legacy isn't being remembered, it's being repeated. And so they repeated him. Not with monuments, but with motion. The Cole Initiative grew faster than anyone expected. Governments reached out for guidance. Corporations wanted to sponsor innovation centers. But Mia and the board refused to let it lose its soul. We'll grow, she said. But only if we can keep it human. This is a phantoming to the lied. Lack of the lad. Set of templage to 2 tenths of that, they built community-owned labs where children could tinker freely. Local mentors were trained not just in mechanics, but in mentorship, ethics, and empathy. Each new workshop was required to build its own benches, using recycled wood. Because the first thing you build, Mia reminded them, should always remind you of where you started. Funding was transparent. Every donation was posted publicly. Every expense accounted for. It was the kind of honesty Ethan had lived by. Within 5 years, the initiative had helped open more than 1,000 learning hubs across 50 countries. But their mission was never just about tools. It was about reclaiming dignity through creation. One story, in particular, captured hearts everywhere. In a small mountain village in Peru, a 12-year-old boy named Diego used scrap metal and a discarded generator blueprint to build a water pump for his town. When asked where he'd learned to do it, he said, "From Mr. Cole. He told us failure was practice." The video of Diego's invention reached millions. People started calling these young creators the builders. They weren't engineers or professionals. They were kids who believed they could fix something and did. By then, Ethan's story had become a movement far larger than the man himself. There were documentaries, books, even a feature film in the works. But Mia and Victor made sure that every cent of profit went straight back into the foundation. "No one owns his story," Victor said in an interview. "We just get to live inside it." Years passed, but the symbol of the 2 hands holding a gear first sent from Nairobi became the initiative's emblem. It appeared on uniforms, banners, even postage stamps in a few countries. Every line, every curve, traced back to one idea: building and guiding together. Mia often returned to the original garage when she needed clarity. It was still small, still full of the same scent of oil and dust. The old Mustang stood there, untouched since Ethan's passing. On quiet nights, she'd sit on the workbench and imagine him humming, scribbling in his notebook, pausing mid-thought to say, "What if we tried it this way?" She smiled at the memory. Because even now, years later, people still work that way, trying, failing, adjusting, believing. The foundation kept expanding, but something unexpected began to happen. Instead of becoming centralized, it began to decentralize. Communities started running their own chapters independently, linked only by shared values. The model worked because it wasn't built to control, it was built to empower. In one annual report, Mia wrote, "Ethan didn't leave us instructions. He left us an invitation to build without permission." That philosophy reshaped education policy in several countries. Schools began adopting hands-on build days, encouraging students to repair or redesign everyday objects. Colleges started integrating applied empathy courses inspired by Ethan's mentorship style. Even the corporate world took notice. Several major companies began hosting internal Fix-It Weeks, where employees stepped away from screens to learn mechanical and creative skills. Productivity soared, but more importantly, so did morale. People felt human again. One spring, Mia received an email from a remote island off the coast of Indonesia. The subject line read, "He's still here." Attached were photos of children gathered in a small shack, working on a broken fishing engine with a faded sign behind them that read, "Keep building. Keep believing." Mia stared at the photo for a long time before forwarding it to Victor with one sentence. "He really is everywhere." Victor called her that evening. "You know," he said, "I think Ethan planned it this way. He built something too simple to break." She laughed softly. "And too honest to copy." Their reflection. 10 years after Ethan's death, the Cole Foundation held a global event called the Builders Reunion. Thousands attended in person. Millions watched online. The stage backdrop showed only one image, the original handwritten note Ethan had left on his workbench, his looping script still visible. "Keep building. Keep believing." Mia stepped onto the stage, holding the rusted wrench. The crowd went silent. "This," she said, lifting it, "is the tool that started everything. It fixed more than engines, it fixed the way we see ourselves. And it belongs to all of us now. He have to insetarity for today." She placed the wrench into a glass case beneath a small plaque. "Here lies the tool that taught the world how to begin again." The crowd erupted not with cheers, but with applause that felt like gratitude. Afterward, Mia walked off stage and stood beside Victor. The two watched as children lined up to touch the glass, some pressing their palms against it, others whispering quiet thank yous. Victor turned to her. "He'd be proud." Mia shook her head. "He'd tell us to stop clapping and get back to work." They both laughed, knowing she was right. That night, across the world, lights flickered on in hundreds of workshops. In Manila, a girl soldered her first circuit. In Cairo, a group of teens repaired old laptops for school children. In Detroit, a father taught his son how to fix a motorbike using an online Cole Foundation guide. And in every one of those places, a simple phrase glowed somewhere on the wall, handwritten, painted, or etched. "Keep building. Keep believing." Ethan Cole's story wasn't about a single man anymore. It was about all of them. The mechanics, the dreamers, the teachers, the failures who refused to quit. Together, they had turned one man's quiet persistence into a global heartbeat. And as long as something in the world still needed fixing, that heartbeat would never stop. The next morning after the builders' reunion, sunlight poured through the old garage windows, catching the dust in warm, golden beams. Mia arrived early, just as Ethan used to. The silence felt sacred, an echo of all the mornings he'd begun with a wrench in one hand and a notebook in the other. She walked to the wall where his letter hung, framed, the one titled, "To the Builders Yet to Come." Below it, dozens of handwritten notes from children around the world were pinned, each one starting with the same words, "Dear Mr. Cole. Thank you for teaching me." She smiled, tracing one small note written in uneven handwriting. "Thank you for teaching me that broken things can be fixed. I fixed my mom's sewing machine today." The simplicity of it brought tears to her eyes. This, she thought, was what legacy really looked like, not in headlines or history books, but in the quiet victories of people who refused to give up. Later that day, she met with the foundation board to discuss a new phase of expansion. The topic: Project Continuum. Its purpose was simple: take the model that Ethan built and make it self-sustaining for generations. No more relying on donations or grants. Instead, each local workshop would build, sell, or repair community goods, using the profits to fund education and outreach. It was ambitious, but deeply in line with what Ethan always believed. Real change happens when people take ownership of their future. Victor Lang, older now and moving a little slower, sat at the end of the table. His voice carried the same quiet authority it always had. "Ethan once told me," he said, "that building engines and building people are the same thing. You just have to keep the fire balanced with the structure." Everyone nodded. Project Continuum was approved that same afternoon. Within months, new workshops started operating independently, each one unique to its region. In Cambodia, students repaired old farming machines. In Ghana, teenagers built affordable solar lamps. In Finland, a team designed adaptive tools for people with disabilities. Everywhere, the heartbeat of Ethan's philosophy pulsed quietly. Listen, fix, teach, repeat. But even as the foundation thrived, Mia felt a restlessness she couldn't quite explain. The bigger things got, the more she missed. The simplicity of those early days, the smell of engine oil, the late nights in the garage, the quiet mentorship that shaped her into who she'd become. One evening, after another long board meeting filled with charts and deadlines, she went back to the original workshop alone. She turned on the lights, dusted the old workbench, and sat with her hands folded. "Ethan," she whispered into the quiet, "what would you do now?" There was no answer, of course. But somehow, she knew it. He'd tell her to stop worrying about growth and start worrying about purpose. So she made a decision. The next morning, Mia announced a new initiative: the Back to Hands program. Its goal wasn't to build more workshops, it was to bring the leaders of existing ones back into the field for 1 month each year. No laptops, no meetings. Just hands-on work with the people they served. Progress isn't just about scale, Mia said during the press briefing. It's about staying grounded. The announcement surprised many, but it worked. Leaders who'd spent years in management rediscovered their original spark. They came back with new insights, new stories, and a renewed sense of why they started. In the years that followed, the Back to Hands program became a cornerstone of the Foundation's culture. It created a cycle of humility, ensuring that every person in leadership remembered what it meant to get their hands dirty, to fail, and to start again. That was what kept the Foundation alive, even as technology raced ahead. By 2050, humanity had shifted into a new era. AI-driven design, automated production, and near-total digitalization of industries. Many feared the death of craftsmanship. But thanks to Ethan's legacy, something remarkable happened. Manual learning came back into style. Universities built hybrid curriculums combining coding with carpentry, robotics with repair, software with empathy. The phrase Cole certified became synonymous with integrity, meaning a product had been designed ethically, sustainably, and by human hands that cared. One major tech company even added a line to its mission statement: "We build like Cole." Meanwhile, Mia continued to lead quietly. She never married, never sought fame, and never moved far from that small workshop. People often called her Ethan's torchbearer, but she refused the title. "He didn't hand me a torch," she'd say. "He taught me how to light my own." And she wasn't the only one. The new generation of builders, young engineers, artists, and dreamers carried forward the movement in ways Ethan could have never predicted. Some built sustainable homes out of waste materials. Others used old technology to create new solutions for rural healthcare. A few even formed global build-a-thons, where participants had 48 hours to design something that solved a real-world problem. No prizes, no sponsors, just impact. What united them wasn't a brand or an organization. It was belief. The belief that anyone, anywhere, could make something better if they just tried. On the 15th anniversary of Ethan Cole's passing, the Foundation decided to honor him with a global live stream event. But instead of speeches, they planned something else, something Ethan himself would have loved. They called it The Great Fix. At exactly 3 p.m. GMT, millions of people across the world began fixing something, anything. Bikes, laptops, shoes, chairs, toys, even relationships. Some did it in silence. Others shared it online with the hashtag number, #KeepBuilding. It was the largest synchronized act of repair in human history. Mia joined from her workshop, tightening the bolts on the old '67 Mustang. She'd kept it running all these years, just as Ethan had left it. When the engine roared to life, she whispered, "Still with us, aren't you?" The live stream reached nearly 1 billion views. People cried, laughed, shared stories of what they'd fixed, and in every corner of the world, someone repeated his words. Failure isn't the end, it's the beginning. That night, after the broadcast, Mia received a package with no return address. Inside was a simple journal, its leather worn, the pages filled with sketches, ideas, and quotes. On the inside cover were 4 words written in Ethan's familiar hand. "Start anyway. Keep going." She didn't know how it had found its way to her after all these years, but it didn't matter. She knew what it meant. Ethan was gone. But his message? It was eternal. The years kept passing, and the world kept changing, but the message Ethan Cole had left behind seemed to grow louder with time. Even in an age where machines could learn and build on their own, there was something profoundly human about what he had taught. The courage to begin, even when failure felt inevitable. The Cole Foundation had now become an invisible thread running through nearly every corner of society. From schools in rural Africa to engineering startups in New York. The idea of build, fail, learn, repeat had become a universal rhythm. But what no one expected was that Ethan's legacy would soon find a home in space. It started when a group of young engineers from the Foundation's Finland chapter received an invitation from the European Space Agency. They had developed a self-repairing mechanical system using principles Ethan had once demonstrated in a lecture about listening to failure. Their design could detect malfunctions and reconfigure itself almost as if the machine could learn empathy. They called it Project Echo, named after the way Ethan's words still echoed in their lives. When Mia heard about it, she traveled to Finland to see their progress firsthand. The workshop looked familiar: wires, tools, half-assembled parts, but everything here was sleeker, faster, more advanced. The lead engineer, a soft-spoken woman named Lena, showed her a small module the size of a shoebox. "It can fix itself," she said proudly. "We learned from Ethan's old lesson: don't discard the broken part. Listen to it. It knows what it needs." Mia smiled. He'd love this. Lena hesitated, then added quietly. We'd like to name it after him. Thanks for watching. We don't record it in elated Baltax. When the prototype launched into orbit 6 months later, the world watched. And when the robotic system successfully repaired itself mid-flight after a minor malfunction, headlines spread everywhere. The Cole Principle reaches space. It wasn't about technology, it was about spirit. Humanity had built a machine that mirrored the very resilience Ethan had taught. That same year, the Foundation celebrated its 20th anniversary. The event was held at Horizon Dynamics' original headquarters, a full-circle tribute to where Ethan's journey had turned from struggle to purpose. Victor Lang, older now and walking with a cane, took the stage. I've seen men chase wealth, he said. And I've seen others chase meaning. Ethan taught me that when you build something honest, it lasts longer than you do. He paused, looking at Mia. He wasn't just an inventor, he was a compass. The crowd stood in quiet applause. No one needed grand speeches. They all knew what he meant. After the ceremony, Mia stayed behind in the empty hall. She found herself staring out the same window where Ethan had once stood years ago. The city lights stretched endlessly, like constellations. She remembered his favorite saying, "You don't need to reach the stars. You just need to build something that makes them feel closer." That night, she walked outside, crossed the street to a small diner, and ordered black coffee, Ethan's drink of choice. The waitress, young and curious, asked what brought her in so late. "I'm remembering someone," Mia said with a smile. "Must have been someone important." Mia stirred her coffee slowly. "Yeah," she whispered. "He taught me how to fail." The waitress tilted her head. "That doesn't sound like a good thing." "It was the best thing," Mia said. "Because it taught me how to begin." Months later, Mia began collecting Ethan's writings and sketches, planning to publish them in a book. The journal that had mysteriously arrived after the Great Fix became its centerpiece. She called the collection, The Quiet Blueprints. Inside were pages filled with thoughts. Ethan had never shared publicly notes on kindness, patience, and the craft of listening. One page stood out, written in faded ink. "We always talk about progress like it's forward motion. But sometimes, progress is stopping long enough to fix what's behind you." The book became a global bestseller not because it was glamorous, but because it was honest. It reminded people that innovation didn't begin in labs or conferences. It began in small moments when someone chose to repair rather than replace. Meanwhile, Project Echo, the space module, had gone beyond its original mission. It became the foundation for an entire line of self-healing satellites. The engineers credited Ethan Cole's philosophy in every interview. And then, one day, something unexpected happened. NASA contacted the Foundation with a request. They were developing a long-term Mars habitat and wanted the first workshop on the planet to carry Ethan's principles. They asked for permission to use the phrase "keep building, keep believing" as the inscription above its entrance. Mia sat at her desk, reading the letter over and over. A tear slipped down her cheek. She whispered, "He's still teaching us." The request was approved. Years later, when the Mars workshop was finally completed, the plaque was installed exactly as written. Astronauts reported that whenever they entered, they could feel something familiar like the hum of an old garage far away on Earth. Back home, the Foundation continued to evolve. Children who had once attended the earliest road workshops were now adults leading their own. One of them was a young woman named Anna, the same girl from Manila who once said, "I want to learn how to fail the right way." Well, now, she stood at the helm of the Foundation, carrying the movement into a new generation. Her leadership style mirrored Ethan's. Gentle, steady, quietly powerful. Under her, the organization began focusing on environmental restoration, repairing the planet itself. They built ocean cleanup machines from recycled engines, converted abandoned factories into education centers, and launched programs that taught sustainable design to kids as young as 6. When reporters asked why she'd shifted the focus, Anna said simply, "Because fixing the world is just the biggest version of what Mr. Cole taught us." That's massive and no. By the time Earth entered the mid-21st century, the Cole name had become less about one person and more about a principle. A reminder that every generation inherits both broken things and the chance to rebuild them. Mia, now in her late 60s, spent her final years traveling between workshops, quietly observing, mentoring, and writing letters to young builders. She never let anyone call her Dr. Cole or the heir of Ethan's legacy. She'd always say, "No one inherits his work, we just keep it in motion." On her last trip to the original garage, she walked slowly, running her hand along the old walls. She looked up at the phrase painted above the door, weathered but still clear. "Keep building, keep believing." She smiled, whispered, "Still running," and turned off the lights for the night. The next morning, the foundation released a message worldwide. For every hand that ever built, every heart that ever tried. Thank you. The light Ethan lit still burns, and it's in your hands now. And somewhere, across 100 countries, thousands of people picked up their tools again, ready to begin. By the late 2050 seconds, the name coal had become more than a name, it was a verb. To coal, something meant to fix it, to rebuild it from scratch, to make it honest again. It was strange how the word had evolved, but maybe not so strange after all. The world had always needed words for repair. There were coal centers now on every continent, some large and high-tech, others small and homemade, running off solar panels and recycled engines. And yet, they all carried the same essence. Build. Share. Pass it on. Anna, now the global director of the foundation, often reminded her team of Ethan's earliest principle. Don't grow to impress, grow to include. She lived by it. Every year, the foundation hosted what they called the Renewal Summit, a gathering not of elites, but of everyday builders. Farmers, teachers, engineers, artists, mechanics, mothers, people who had taken Ethan's ideas and turned them into something local, something alive. The summit wasn't about awards or presentations. It was about exchange. Tables overflowed with sketches, prototypes, recycled parts, and half-finished dreams. You could walk through the hall and hear 50 different languages all saying the same thing. Look what we made. At the 10th Renewal Summit, Anna took the stage. Behind her, a massive screen displayed a timeline, a visual map of Ethan Cole's influence. From the small garage in his hometown to the Mars workshop where astronauts now fix tools using his methods. She looked out over the crowd and said, "The world called him a failure once. And maybe he was until he failed the right way. Until he taught us that failure isn't falling, it's choosing not to get up. And we're proof that he got up. And so did we." The applause that followed was more like a heartbeat, steady, human, full of gratitude. Meanwhile, Project Continuum had entered its most ambitious phase yet. Reclamation. The foundation had begun rebuilding abandoned industrial sites across the world, turning them into circular innovation hubs, places where waste became raw material, and forgotten spaces became classrooms. One of the first projects took place in Detroit, inside a shuttered auto plant from the early 2000s. The rusting factory that once symbolized industrial decline was reborn as the Coal Revival Center. It employed former factory workers, trained young engineers, and powered itself using hybrid generators inspired by Ethan's early prototypes. When the center launched, a reporter asked Anna what made this place different. She said, "Because the hands that once built cars are now building futures. Their lives is Crete now." The quote spread fast, not as a slogan, but as a reminder. The Revival Center became the blueprint for dozens of similar transformations across the world, from textile mills in India to steel plants in Poland. In every single one, the old and the young worked side by side, bridging generations through shared creation. Technology had changed the pace of everything, but Ethan's philosophy still anchored it all. Artificial intelligence now handled design simulations, 3D printing, and optimization. Yet people still came to coal centers to touch, to build, to feel the hum of something real under their fingers. It wasn't nostalgia. It was connection. Because even in an era of digital perfection, people still broke things, and still needed the courage to fix them. That was Ethan's lasting miracle. He hadn't built a company, he'd built a culture. One day, Anna received an encrypted message from the Mars workshop. Inside was a short video, an astronaut floating beside a small plaque, camera shaking slightly as he read the words aloud. "Keep building. Keep believing." Then, the astronaut added, "This workshop has been running continuously for 3 years, without a single system failure. Ethan's principle works even out here." Anna smiled when she saw it. Then she forwarded it to the entire foundation network with the caption, "He's still working." Within hours, hundreds of replies flooded in from every corner of the planet. Photos of projects, thank you messages, children holding up signs that said, "We're still building." It was the largest single thread of gratitude ever shared online. As the 60th anniversary of Ethan Cole's first workshop approached, the foundation decided to mark the occasion not with a ceremony, but with action. They launched Operation Homecoming, a global initiative to restore 1 million broken community structures. Bridges, schools, homes, clinics. Every chapter, every builder, every volunteer joined in. The work took months. There were no press releases, no public sponsors, just human effort. By the time it was done, over 1.2 million structures had been repaired or rebuilt. Anna stood at one of the finished sites, a small school in the Philippines rebuilt from storm wreckage. A mural covered the side wall, painted by children. Ethan's face surrounded by hands of every color, holding tools, flowers, and gears. In the corner were 3 words in bold white paint. Failure built this. She laughed through her tears. Because she knew Ethan would have loved that. As technology advanced, some began to question whether humanity still needed builders. Machines could now diagnose, assemble, and optimize faster than any human hand. But the Foundation never saw technology as a threat, it saw it as a partner. They began training new generations in hybrid craftsmanship. The art of working with machines instead of competing against them. The classes were called Hands Plus Circuits. In them, students learned how to repair AI-driven systems manually, how to design with empathy, and how to maintain the human fingerprint in every invention. When critics called it outdated, Anna replied, "You can automate a process, but not a purpose." That quote would become one of the most cited lines of the decade. By the 2070 seconds, the world had transformed in ways Ethan could have only imagined. Cities were cleaner, communities more connected, education more accessible. And somewhere in all that progress, a small workshop, Ethan's original garage, still stood. Preserved not as a museum, but as a living classroom. Every year, a group of young builders from around the world would gather there for an apprenticeship program. They'd sleep in nearby hostels, cook meals together, and spend long nights tinkering under the same flickering bulb Ethan once worked by. At the end of the program, each student would add something small to the space, a tool, a note, a design sketch, and carve their initials into the wooden beam near the door. Over time, the beam became filled with hundreds of names, each one another heartbeat in the story that never stopped. One quiet evening, after the last group had gone home, Anna stood alone in that garage. She looked around the tools, the smell of oil, the sound of the wind humming through the old vents. She picked up the rusted wrench, the same one Ethan had used, and whispered, "We did it, Ethan. You built a world that remembers how to begin again." Then she set the wrench down gently on the workbench, where sunlight caught its surface and made it shine. Outside, a child passing by pressed her face to the window and smiled, whispering the words she'd learned at school that week. Keep building. Keep believing. And somewhere, across time and memory, it felt as if the workshop itself exhaled a quiet hum, a heartbeat, a reminder that no creation ever truly ends. Years rolled forward like a wheel that never stopped turning. The world Ethan Cole had inspired was no longer a dream or a project, it was a living, breathing movement woven into the fabric of everyday life. You could walk into almost any town and find a small sign somewhere on a workshop door, a classroom wall, or even the side of a passing train car painted in those familiar words. Keep building. Keep believing. It wasn't just a motto anymore. It had become a promise between generations, between strangers, between the world as it was, and the world that could still be rebuilt. One evening, Anna found herself back where it had all begun. The old garage, the birthplace of everything. She hadn't been there in years, and yet the smell of engine oil, the hum of the nearby road, and the faint clatter of tools felt like they'd been waiting for her. The lights flickered on with a soft hum. Dust floated in the air like tiny memories. She walked slowly, tracing her hand along the wooden beam filled with hundreds of carved initials, students, dreamers, inventors, each one a small story that began because one man refused to give up. On the far wall, she saw Ethan's framed note again. To the builders yet to come. The paper had faded, but the ink still held. She sat down at his old bench, opened her tablet, and began to write her annual address to the Foundation network, a tradition that had begun after his passing. This time, though, the words came differently. We were never building for recognition. We were building for continuation. Ethan didn't leave behind instructions, he left behind belief. And belief doesn't age. It only grows when shared. If you are reading this, wherever you are on Earth, on Mars, in some workshop that doesn't even exist yet, remember this. Fixing what's broken isn't charity. It's our duty to each other. She paused, smiling as she typed the closing line. Keep building. Keep believing. Because someone, somewhere, will need what you make next. She hit send. The message would ripple across the network within seconds, reaching millions of people who'd grown up under the Cole philosophy. Students, engineers, teachers, farmers, dreamers, all of them bound by a shared sense of purpose. The next morning, the world began what had become a yearly tradition, the Day of Making. For 24 hours, people everywhere stopped what they were doing to build something. Some repaired shoes, others planted trees, restored bikes, designed tools, or wrote code to solve problems no one had touched yet. Cities dimmed their billboards for 1 minute, replacing them with a simple projection. Ethan Cole's silhouette. And beneath it, those eternal words. From the frozen research stations in Antarctica to the deserts of Australia, the world buzzed with the sound of creation. It wasn't chaos, it was music. And in that symphony of motion, Anna saw exactly what Ethan had dreamed of. A world that no longer needed permission to begin. By the end of the day, the Foundation's global dashboard recorded over 300 million completed projects. Not one for profit, not one for fame, just pure intention. A child in Ghana had built a hand-powered water pump. A group of retirees in Italy had restored an entire village clock tower. A young coder in Toronto had written software that translated blueprints for low literacy users. It was staggering, but it wasn't surprising. Ethan had once said, "If you teach enough people how to listen, eventually the whole world starts talking sense again." That day, the world did. That evening, as Anna prepared to leave the garage, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. Underneath the old workbench, hidden behind a loose panel, there was a small tin box. Dusty. Forgotten. She pulled it out, opened it carefully, and inside were a few folded papers, a rusted key, and a note written in Ethan's handwriting. "For whoever finds this. The key doesn't open a door. It opens a start. Use it to build something that hasn't been imagined yet. And remember, nothing built with kindness ever goes to waste." Anna sat there, holding the note, tears filling her eyes. She didn't know what the key belonged to, and maybe that was the point. Ethan had always believed that mystery was just another word for potential. She placed the note back in the box, locked it again, and set it on the workbench where sunlight could touch it. In the decades that followed, the key became a symbol for the next generation. They called it the Builder's Key. Every year, it was passed to a new innovator, a young person chosen not for what they'd achieved, but for what they dared to try. Each holder added something to the tradition. A note, a sketch, a tool, or even just a story. Over time, the tin box filled with reminders that imagination never ends. The key wasn't about unlocking something old, it was about trusting that the next person would know what to build next. By the dawn of the 22nd century, Ethan Cole's influence had outlived empires, technologies, and trends. His story was taught not as history, but as philosophy. And in a quiet classroom on the Moon Colony, the first human settlement beyond Earth, a teacher named Alara stood before a group of children holding small wrenches and screwdrivers. She told them about a man who had once been called a failure. "A failure?" one of the students asked, puzzled. Alara smiled. "That's what they said. But he learned that failure isn't something to fear. It's something to learn from. Because everything that fails leaves behind instructions for how to do it better." This is in reporting the mastered of Merikit without of nine of his world. There massacly imperious to some margin. There 9 diasine. With this in Kinjer. "Did he go to space?" another child asked. "No," Alara said softly. "But his ideas did. And that's how you got here." The children looked at each other, smiling. Then, one little boy raised his hand. "Can we fix something now?" The teacher nodded. That's exactly what he'd want, and so they did. In that small classroom, under a dome of glass and stars, children began their first build session. The hum of tools echoed softly against the walls, the same rhythm that had begun so many years ago in a tiny earthside garage. One of the kids, a girl with bright eyes, looked up at the painted mural on the wall. It showed 2 hands holding a gear, the same emblem that had traveled through generations. Beneath it were those timeless words, etched in both English and Lunar Common. "Keep building. Keep believing." She smiled, picked up her wrench and whispered, "Okay, Mr. Cole. Let's start." Outside, the earth hung in the sky, a blue reminder of where it all began, and somewhere, across galaxies of memory, you could almost hear him again, steady, patient, proud, saying what he'd always said. "Start anyway."